How can you glean critical business insights from your data 10 times faster than ever before? Well, with AI, of course. Welcome to the Super Data Science Podcast. I'm your host, John Krohn. Today, my guest is Marc Dupuis, co-founder and CEO of fabi.ai, which is a Bay Area-based AI-native business intelligence platform. Fabi combines SQL, Python, and AI into one platform so anyone can explore, discover, and share data insights in real time. If it can do all that, do we even need data scientists anymore? Listen in and find out. This episode of Super Data Science is made possible by Anthropic, Dell, Intel, and Gurobi. Marc, welcome to the Super Data Science Podcast. It's great to have you on the show. Where are you calling in from?
Hey there, John. I'm calling in from Oakland, California.
Very nice. And what's it like out there? Because I have a lot of people from the Bay Area, and obviously you get lots of complaints about Bay Area weather. But in Oakland, do you manage to get away from that just enough that like you get to enjoy seasons and it's hot in the summer, that kind of stuff?
It gets warm. Right now it's actually a little overcast, but it definitely gets a lot warmer. One of the big draws for the East Bay for sure is you're not dealing with Carl the fog. For those who aren't from the Bay Area and don't know, Carl is the infamous fog that rolls in like clockwork at like 4 p.m. every single day in SF.
I did not know that, so thank you for the
Yeah,
thank you for the inside
Carl.
scoop.
I think Carl might even have a Twitter, Instagram handle. So if you're very passionate about fog and SF, then you can follow along.
There you go. Well, probably not going to be the main topic of our conversation today. So you're the co-founder of fabi.ai, Fabi. So I'd love to understand where that name came from, and maybe you can get to the name by telling us about why you founded the company in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the name actually, and then I'll kind of like back into to why the name makes sense. But Fabi BI, very simple, fast BI, Fabi. Also one of those things where easy to pronounce, easy to spell, memorable, 4-letter word with .ai. So everything just
The URL was available.
The URL is available, and it wasn't for $50,000 or whatever. So the stars kind of aligned for us. So that's the origin of the name. But why we start Fabi is and why Fast BI. I think it might be helpful to like actually talk a little bit about sort of my background, my history, and my co-founders. And so I can actually start with like I got my master's in neurotech at Imperial actually, and I know you studied as well in the UK. And after getting my master's in neurotech, where I was exposed to data science and machine learning, I got hired as a data scientist. That was actually technically my first job out of college.
Can I interrupt you for one quick second
Yeah.
with an Imperial question? Something that blows my mind about Imperial College London is how it is one of the most respected and research productive universities on the planet. It
Yeah.
sometimes literally tops as number one, and I feel like it doesn't get the name recognition that it deserves, especially in the US.
You know what? It's funny. I've always thought about that, and I don't know. In Europe, everyone knows it. Here in the U.S., Oxford, Cambridge, obviously incredible schools, but Imperial, even compared to like UCL and King's, which I feel like have like kind of bigger names. I don't know. Maybe they need to like rethink their marketing strategy or something in the U.S. because incredible school, but just not as big of a name.
Yeah, and especially for a technical discipline like you studied, like you might have been doing neurotechnology at the best place in the world that you could have been doing it. So congrats to you. I just felt like you kind of glossed over, you even kind of mumbled Imperial out. So I just wanted to call out what a big deal it is that you have there.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. It was a lot of work, a lot of fun. Loved what I studied there. Definitely surrounded by just incredibly smart people. Definitely lots of people who are like just much smarter than me. I went on to do some incredible things, but yeah, so I did that, and then I got hired as a data scientist thanks to my exposure to data science and machine learning there. But very quickly, actually, and very naturally, I transitioned into product management. And so that's been, I like to say that's been like my bread and butter for the last 10 plus years, where I've been doing product management for data intense SaaS applications. And I've been working on like integrations and AI and embedded analytics. And my co-founder, he's actually sort of similar origin story, but he's got a PhD in computer science and machine learning. and he's actually remained a data scientist, and he's done incredible things as well in his career, including leading data science teams at companies like Lyft, where he's done some really cool things. But him and I met actually when he was leading the data science team, an AI team at Clary, and so we worked together very closely there. Where I was a counterpart on the product side, and the origin of Fabi and the Fast BI is that I was actually leaning on him a lot for data questions and analyst questions. So I'm sort of like technical. I like to say that I'm technical enough to read and write Python to some degree, but not so much like I'm going and like just doing these things on my own. And like over time as a product manager, those skills like will atrophy because like that's just not what you're doing in your day to day. So like kind of throughout my career, I ended up leaning more and more on my data counterpart. And one of those, I kind of like joke, one of those poor souls was my now co-founder Lay, who would be dealing with my questions, and he would kind of have to like run off on his side and pull up a Jupyter notebook or in his IDE, pull the data and then download it and export it and send it to me. This was like the very early days of Slack, so he'd send it to you over email or Slack as a spreadsheet or PowerPoint or screenshot or something like that. And so we just thought it would be a much better way for those two parties to collaborate much more effectively, using a combination of AI and also other features that we've sort of built into Fabi.
Cool. Thanks for that intro to the company. And yeah, now the Fast BI thing in Fabi does seem pretty obvious now that you've mentioned that. There's another term associated with your platform that I'd love you to dig into. It's vibe analytics. So, kind of getting on the vibe coding train, but being more, it's, I guess focused more at kind of the BI level, at like, making an impact in the business, as opposed to, say, building an application.
Yeah, so there's different feelings about the term vibe. So I use it because I love it. I think it's very descriptive, and I think people immediately understand what it means when we talk about vibe coding and vibe analyzing and vibe building. But I do know that like there's mixed feelings about how what it actually means. But the idea for vibe analytics is that you can actually build data apps or dashboards or workflows primarily through AI. And so one big thing that we built at Fabi is like this. It can be fully autonomous or semi-autonomous AI that can build out these things for you. And so that's really powerful for what I call like semi-technical folks, like product managers and CSMs or founders who don't necessarily have the data chops to go and do things like that on their own with existing BI solutions. But now with AI, they can actually literally like just talk to AI and like watch it build that data app or that workflow or that analysis for them. And at the same time, we also believe that can really empower, and what we're seeing is it's really empowering data teams and folks like data scientists because they can also the AI nowadays is just incredible, and it can like truly build out these entire like analyses and help them with exploratory data analysis as well, and let the data scientists ultimately focus on what I would argue is like much higher value tasks than like just the coding. Coding is obviously in itself, it's interesting, it's fun, but if you can kind of like get that out of the way, then the data scientists can actually focus on again on much higher value tasks to actually like move the business forward. So that's the idea of like vibe analytics. There's all sorts of things that we can dig into, John, here too, about like what it means to build a vibe analytics platform. Like one big thing that we believe in is like the AI shouldn't be able to like just talk to your data warehouse in real time every single time, because like that will sort of like run up the cost of your data warehouse. So you have to be very careful. You don't want to just like put an MCP server in the hands or connection in the hands of your favorite marketer and let them run wild. Like that will be your data warehouse AE will thank you if you do that. So all sorts of implications in what it means to be building a vibe analytics platform.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks for that insight into the vibe term there. If people in organizations are able to do vibe analytics, if the kind of the end user, the business user in a company, a business expert, not necessarily somebody that can code, can be using a platform to be pulling out analytics automatically. I mean, the whole idea of Fabi is fast VI. What is the implication for people who, are kind of my core audience on the show, hands-on data science practitioners, AI engineers? Does it mean that companies don't need data scientists anymore, uh, if a tool like Fabi is in place in their organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I absolutely don't think it means that you don't need data scientists anymore. I think it changes I think it changes the way data scientists work and how they interact with their counterparts in a few big ways. I think the first is, and this can always be a little bit hard to quantify. The first big thing is that if you're actually letting your business counterpart explore data more on their own, you're going to have a much more data literate, informed counterpart. And so I'll take myself as an example as a product manager. If I'm able to actually explore the data on my own, get a first pull of the data, even if it's not 100% right, I'm going to come to you as a data scientist with a much better initial question. I'm not just going to go and file a ticket in Jira or Linear, wherever you might be filing tickets. That doesn't really make much sense because I've had a chance to actually do some of that basic exploration. And that just creates like a much more collaborative, informed, intelligent environment than what you have today. So that's one big thing that we're seeing really change with our customers. The other big thing I would say too is that if you think about, and if we focus like on AI specifically, AI is becoming incredibly good at coding, and so the sort of logical extension to that is that the value of knowing how to code and like rote memorization. Like if you, let's say you're just like creating like a plotly chart, and in the past maybe like forget how to, or someone actually remembers exactly how to do a plotly chart off the cuff, like that may have been valuable in the past, but I think in the future that's actually not going to be as valuable. Instead, what's going to be valuable as a data scientist is going to be, I'd say, like really two things. One is having a really deep understanding of the business. And so like this is why I tell like any sort of data scientist and even just data practitioner in general in the enterprise is the number one thing that you can be doing right now is like just better understanding how the business is making money and making a profit, or growing depending on the stage of the company, and like really understanding like the P&L of the business, the profit and loss. And the other thing that I think is really going to change for data scientists as well is, since you're going to be spending less time on the coding, they're going to be able to spend a lot more time on like the actual experimentation setup, right? And like thinking about the hypothesis, studying the results. And there's going to be a lot more value for data scientists who actually have a really strong fundamental understanding of stats and ML, because you're going to have to be able to supervise the AI and make sure that it's like writing the algorithm the way it needs to be based on the experiment, based on your data. And so I personally think that it's incredibly exciting time actually for data scientists, because you're kind of getting out of like sort of the I would say like the less value add tasks, and you're actually going to be able to start exercising more of the muscle that you probably went to school for, to even studying and thinking about for for most of your career. So I think it's probably like the single most exciting time for data scientists in the past like 5-10 years.
Gen AI and classic machine learning are great at solving a lot of problems, but they are not built for complex decision problems. Even a slew of agents can't deal with all the possibilities when there are trillions or trillions of possibilities. Mathematical optimization, in contrast, is the perfect complement to these skills for decision making at scale. To get you going, Gurobi has hands-on online trainings made just for data scientists. The latest installment of optimization for data scientists, called Opti 301, is just around the corner. To catch up on this series, register for the upcoming training, and to check out other resources like case studies optimization, head to gurobi.com/learn. That's GUROBI.com/learn. Right, I see what you're saying there. So that instead of replacing data scientists, tools like this elevate data scientists by allowing us to get away from the drudgery of creating some plotly call that's relatively straightforward, and being able to focus on bigger, more complex questions. That makes a lot of sense to me. Going back to something that you said in your preceding answer, you were talking about how we need to be careful to not be allowing anyone in the organization to be doing huge Google BigQuery calls that are costing huge
Yeah.
amounts of money. Just because you have like some easy to use tool on top of databases doesn't mean it's not something that you can do without being careful. You need to have some guardrails in place. And so, for example, there's a there's a glowing testimonial that we pulled from the fabi.ai website, where a fitness startup CEO says, "Fabi.ai empowers me as a non-technical user to dive into my own data in real time. But if the CEO is able to do that, they could, if you don't build a platform like Fabi effectively with the right guardrails, there's all kinds of trouble they could run into. They could run into trouble, like you said, on cost, on the cost of pulling data and analyzing those data. But there's also just things like, if you're drawing conclusions, if the CEO is drawing conclusions about their business, there's things in data, because we know the data quality that isn't always perfect. There can be nuance, there could be uncertainty, there could be caveats, assumptions built into the way the data were collected. So, how do you think about guardrails when you're designing a product like Fabi?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that it's also worth noting that there's all sorts of nuance here, right? I mean, the CEO of a Series A company is a very different profile than a CEO of like a public company, where even just a data volume and the complexity of data is drastically different. But actually, there's a few things that come to mind when you ask that question. The first is that so one big thing that we've sort of built in Fabi, for example, is we have a caching layer. So actually, when the AI goes and writes a query, so if you're doing a data analysis and you're asking, hey, go and plot, total sales by product line item or whatever, ultimately you kind of have to like write some Python code to create that chart, but it starts with a SQL query to pull the data. And or as a matter of fact, not, which we can talk about. We have additional connectors that aren't just SQL. But if you are writing a SQL query, if you are going to your data warehouse and it starts with a SQL query, and what we actually do is we will pull the data and we'll cache it as a Python data frame. And that's really important. And we actually will sort of keep that cache, and the subsequent analysis will actually just happen on that cached data to protect the user and avoid hitting data warehouse every single time you're asking a new question. And there's a lot of sort of like magic that's kind of happening behind the scenes, which we can dig into if you want. But there's guardrails like that help someone come in and not be able to like just go and like run up the cost on your data warehouse. But I would also say that the responsibility also lies a little bit on the data team to set up the tool properly and like make sure that like the environment is created, it's the right environment, right? So if you go in and you just hook up your AI to your entire data warehouse that has thousands of tables, and you let someone sort of run wild, but it doesn't make sense for them to have 1,000 tables like that could also be an issue. So we always highly encourage our customers, for example, to only give AI access to the few sort of like core tables that you've actually taken the time to go and query. That will, one, reduce the risk of, again, sort of like costs going up, but also it will really bound the AI and help the results be more accurate. The other thing too that I think is worth talking about is like not necessarily the technological aspect, but the human aspect of supervising the AI when it comes to accuracy and reliability. And that's where we're big believers in the collaboration aspect. So if I go back to my story of like me and Lei, one big thing that we struggled with was we were working he was working out of Jupyter Notebooks. I was working off of whatever file he gave me, but there was no environment where we could come in together in real time and like iterate and see what each of us was seeing. So, one big thing that we built in Value, for example, is this real-time collaborative environment where it's like a Notion like Google experience. And if I go and pull the data and I'm not sure if the results are correct, I can actually send a link over to Lei and say, hey, Lei, can you like go and double check this for me? And or vice versa, what we'll see a lot of data scientists go and like do an initial pull of the data and write the initial query and correct it manually or however they want, and then send over that what we call a smart book, which is effectively a Jupyter notebook on steroids, and they'll send it over to their business counterpart and say, okay, I wrote the initial query. Now you can go and ask whatever question you want on top of that. So, and ultimately, I think it also comes down to, maybe the last thing I'll say here is, I do think it behooves the business user to like understand their own limits. And I think that like that's something that's like underestimated a lot as well. Is I think business users do know what they don't know for the most part. It's not saying they can't go and like pull the wrong data and make the wrong conclusions, but I think a lot of folks will sort of pause and say like, okay, I should like probably double check this before I go and like present to the board.
Yeah, I will say I have met people in corporate environments that are really just looking for data to prove the point that they want to make,
Yeah.
regardless of reality. But
Yeah, those folks exist, but you know what? Like at the end of the day, I don't know, maybe you have a different feeling, but I feel like those folks are going to like find the data no matter what. Like it,
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. If they can't find it internally, they'll find someone who said it online or whatever.
Yeah, or they'll
Yeah.
go export, their data from Salesforce and go manipulate in a spreadsheet until and wrestle it until it says what they want. So yeah, I don't know. I think like AI maybe like makes the trigger a little bit more sensitive, but I don't think that like that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, I gotta say I do much prefer working with the kind of people that you mentioned there, where they are aware of what they don't know and they don't try to
Yeah.
pretend that they know things they don't about data analytics, data science, and yeah, those are the kind of people that I want to be working with. In your most recent response, you mentioned smart books, and you kind of mentioned them in passing, but that piqued my interest. They sound really interesting. Tell us more about those.
Yeah, so very much like a notebook like interface. We've adopted that because actually, data scientists are incredibly familiar with Jupyter notebooks, and so are a lot of like product managers and folks like that. So it's kind of a familiar environment, but there's a few key differences that we're doing in the back. First of all, it's like all fully AI enabled. So the idea is that the AI can literally build out whatever component you want. It can create SQL cells, can create Python cells if you want, but it's also like fully reactive and keeps track of dependencies, which is really important when it comes to converting your smart book to either a data app, which you can do in Fabi, or you can also convert your smart book into a workflow. And that's actually really something like data teams really love about Fabi is once you've done your analysis, we also have like Slack cells blocks effectively, and we have like Google Sheet blocks, so you can like pull your data from anywhere, including like Coda and Notion using these blocks, and then you can also push it to anywhere. And so smart books are really just sort of like the next generation notebook that are just fully supercharged and accessible both to your semi-technical audience as well as data scientists and data engineers.
Does this kind of resolve the issue that a lot of us have experienced where we end up spending a lot of time as, say, a data scientist or a data analyst or a BI expert creating a dashboard, and there's all kinds of specifications, months of work that go into building this dashboard, but then the end user, maybe even the end user or like the team of end users that created all of this product drive anyway, we're going to need this dashboard. They end up exporting it to Excel anyway in the end and just working with
Yeah,
themselves. Does a smart book resolve that?
yeah, it does. It's probably, I would say maybe the single most common theme that we hear when we talk to data teams is that they spend most of their time building out dashboards that either very few people look at or they look at once and they smash that export button. Perfect. I had one person I was talking to, one data scientist one time, tell me kind of like half joking that they would create these dashboards and they would be lucky if someone like sort of like accidentally clicked on the dashboard. I'm like, that's kind of sad to me. Like that's sad that you feel like you're spending like hours working on these dashboards and you're kind of like lucky if someone accidentally looks at it. And again, if they do look at it, chances are they're exporting it. And so we think like one of our big sort of philosophies at Fabi is that dashboards are important. I'm not going to stand here and say like dashboards are dying. I think that they are incredibly important. If you have like a top level dashboard that's driving the business that the CRO is looking at on a weekly or monthly basis, but for the most part, if you want to have an impact as a data team, as data scientists, the biggest thing that you can do is actually meet your stakeholders where they are. And if you think back to like the product manager, the CSM, the AE or whatever, they are spending their days in Slack, in Teams, in spreadsheets, and email. And so we've built a lot of connectors to push those insights automatically to those destinations. And that's been a massive, massive unlock because now suddenly you can receive AI generated insights in your marketing channel or your analytics channel on a daily basis, or you can receive AI created insights in your inbox. And I'll suddenly, as a data scientist, the work you've done is actually being used and actually being consumed. And maybe the last thing I can say on this topic is like I will always tell a data team if you have a choice between creating an automated workflow and creating a dashboard, you should always pick the workflow. Like there's always this debate about ROI on data teams, and ROI on dashboards is just incredibly hard to prove. But behavior change is even harder because like you're counting on someone remembering that dashboard, going to the dashboard, figuring out what they need to take from the dashboard and go and take an action. But if you can go and like automate things where like the human's not even in the loop, then you're going to have a much bigger impact as a data scientist in the organization. Especially if you can like even like flat out skip the sharing the insight and like just go and take that action directly, which you can also do from Fabi, then sort of like massive ROI unlock for the data scientist.
That sounds really good. And I like your clear guidance there for all of us, whether we're product people or data analytics or data science people, that you should always be doing a workflow automation instead of a dashboard. I
Yeah,
agree.
maybe it's a little overly simplistic, and there's like nuances to this, but yeah, as a rule of thumb, I think that's a fairly good rule to live by.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Let's shift gears here a little bit now to the topic that seemingly everyone wants to talk about these days, which is AI agents.
Yep.
And so Fabi also has an agentic element. So it enables businesses to build, deploy, and share specialized data analyst agents. And so in posts that you've written, you've talked about a distinction between code generation or assistant capabilities and an AI being able to take on like a collaborator type role. Do you want to elaborate on these two kinds of roles, like the code generation versus the collaborator?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to in the data world. I think AI has two like very distinct roles to play. One is more of an assistant, more of like a code. Just to kind of like overly simplify, maybe it's like a code generator, so it can help you write your SQL. It can help you write your Python or debug it or optimize it or whatever. And obviously, like in Fabi specifically, like that's a very core component. So like 90 to 95% of the code that's run in Fabi is actually AI generated, but you can also sort of manually correct the code. So there's that aspect of AI for data. But the other sort of like orthogonal use case is actually embedding the AI in your workflows. And it's not so. If you take an example, you could in the past, for example, just automate either you build a dashboard or you could to some degree automate a chart being sent or a table being sent. But the next step is actually having the AI interpret that table, interpret that chart, and maybe even tell you what the next best action could be, and embed the agent as part of that workflow. So that's not like generating code; it's actually interpreting the results for you and telling you where to go. It's like one, we talk about the smart books. Like one thing that we have is we have like these AI summarization cells where you can actually give the AI any number of data frames and say, okay, please go and create like an AI uh, summary or please create an executive summary for me, and it will create your executive summary using whatever LLM you want, and you can like take that summary and then send it off. So those are like the two ways that we think about AI for data analysis.
Thanks. I like your description there of these two different kinds of AI systems. Even more broadly, Mark, how would you describe an AI first platform? Like when you're designing a product AI first, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so there's a few big things that I think really are really important when you think about building a product that has AI at its center. The first is I don't know, actually, John, have you heard of Andre Karpathy's sort of like autonomy scale? Have you heard him talk about that?
I am embarrassed to say that I don't actually. I feel like I follow him pretty closely, but the autonomy scale is not ringing a bell.
It's totally fine. Okay, so no worries. He talked about it at I think it was like the YC like AI day or whatever that was like a few months ago, and really fun talk. Kind of like in sort of like classic Andre Karpathy style, very entertaining. And he talks about the autonomy scale, and I highly recommend anyone who's like building product to actually go and like listen to like that snippet about him talking about it. And he actually like uses like cursor and yeah.
Data scientists, it's time to talk about your tech. With Windows 10 support coming to an end, now is the perfect moment to rethink your setup. Enter Dell AI PCs powered by Intel Core Ultra processors. These devices are built for the demands of modern data science, delivering faster performance, smoother multitasking, and the power to handle even the most complex workflows. Whether you're training machine learning models or analyzing massive datasets, these PCs are designed to keep you ahead of the curve. Don't let outdated tech slow you down. Visit Dell.com/shoppcs to explore how you can upgrade your device and elevate your work. That's Dell.com/SHOPPCS. It sounds like it would be from his Software is Changing Again, Y Combinator talk. I'll have that in the show notes for everyone.
Yeah, and I can dig it up too and make sure you can share it. So if it's not that one, I'll find it for you. But yeah, and it's interesting because he talks about this autonomy scale, and the idea is, and he uses kind of two examples that are sort of fun. One is cursor, and then one is the Iron Man suit. And the idea is that like you can have, I'll pick the Iron Man suit as the sort of example here. He talks about how like, an Iron Man, the suit can literally go and like do its own thing. Like it can operate without Tony Stark in the suit. Or it can like literally just be like this thing that supercharges the human, because like Tony Stark is not a superhero, right? Technically, he's just a human, and it allows him to do things that are that he simply couldn't do before. And the idea is that like there's this autonomy scale where you can choose how autonomous you want the AI to be, and that's one like really big thing that we believe in at Fabi. So we believe that you should be able to pick your own adventure. You should be able to have the AI do as much or as little as you want. You should be able to like literally just code everything by hand, sort of like call it like old school style if you want, or you could have the AI do 100% of the work when it comes to building data apps or workflows. And that's really really important, because if you want to build a tool that's and I'll take our example, but obviously you're building your own product here. But like, if you are, in our case, we want to be as appealing to a data scientist as we are to a product manager. The product manager is going to spend most of their time in the fully autonomous mode, whereas the data scientist is going to spend more of the time in like the semi-autonomous mode. And from an architectural standpoint, when you're designing a product, it requires a lot of thinking about how you create an AI that can actually act on any element of the interface. And so we've put a lot of thinking into like, how do we build an AI that can go and like create the chart, it can go and add an automatic, create a table, it can go and create the filters and do all that stuff. So that's kind of like one big principle that we believe in when you're building an AI first product. The other one that's another one that we believe in is every action should be reversible. So I don't know, John, how much you've used like a Lovable or Replit or some other sort of like vibe coding tool.
I have never used Lovable or Replit. I have had the experience of automatically creating apps in like a ChatGPT or a Claude interface where
Yeah.
like the artifact layer allows me to have the app right there.
Yeah, so same idea, right? And if you do it enough, everyone who does it at some point will have this experience where they're like doing their thing, they're kind of happy with where they are, and then they'll ask like for four or five more questions, and they're like, "Oh, hold on, wait, I took like a wrong turn here. Like I want to sort of back up and go to where things were actually working, and maybe like just hit reset." And so and that's just like I think just a factor of how the AI works and how like vibe coding, vibe analyzing works. So we believe also like every action should be fully reversible. And so, one big thing that we do, for example, is in the smart book, like we'll snapshot versions as you go. So like as you accept the AI's suggestion, we'll actually take a snapshot there, and you can kind of rewind at any point and view a diff of like, okay, what happened? Like, what's the question I asked? What's the before and after? And if I don't like where things kind of like forked off, I can hit revert and I revert back to that. So everything has to be fully reversible in an AI native solution.
I like the forking off verb.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. You took that wrong turn. You're like reverse, get back to it to where
We've gotten forked again. Ah, fork off.
yeah, that's exactly right.
That is great insight into how to build an AI first product. Something specific that a lot of people want when they're thinking about an AI first product is a conversational interface, right? So
Yeah,
you were just talking about it there with Lovable or whatever you're using to vibe code an app, where in that case you're entirely you're going right from natural language conversation to working application. You're not even necessarily seeing the code in between in any way. Um, when you're kind of doing the opposite. So with Fabi, you are in a lot of cases, data are coming out of the platform and you want to be converting data or insights into natural language that can be provided to the user. And I think you might call these smart reports. And so, how do you ensure that that part of your application includes explanations that are correct, reproducible, consistent, maybe well cited, so that people can dig further? Is that tricky to get all of that right?
that kind of comes down to, we talked about the guardrails, sort of like the outset here, and that kind of goes back to the guardrails. And so, when you're building, whether it's like an automated workflow that shares AI generated insights, or you're building a smart report or data app in Fabi, ultimately, as a data practitioner, you have full control about the data that's going in. So, what we're not necessarily doing here at Fabi, at least not today, is we're not giving you an AI that will look at all your data and answer any question about all your data ever. What we're saying is, we're going to give a platform that you as a data scientist can go into, and you can go and take the time to actually write a SQL query and pull the data and structure it and clean it up and do all that kind of stuff and ultimately store it as a data frame. And then you can pass that very sort of succinct curated data frame that you as a data scientist or data practitioner have gone taken time to curate. And then you can pass that to the AI that will then either generate the insights on schedule, or when you're publishing, a smart report in Fabi, for example, we have AI embedded directly there. The AI in the smart report is there to help you answer follow-up questions. But it's only going to look at the data the data frames actually that you've given access to in that specific report. So like one very common thing that we hear is, as a data scientist or an analytics engineer, or whoever's building these dashboards and these data apps, you get a lot of follow-up questions. And so why not just let the AI answer that? But again, the AI in that specific scenario in Fabi is not going to go and like write a raw SQL query and pull new data. It's only going to answer questions off of the data that you, as a data scientist, said, I want the AI to be able to answer questions off of this. And if it doesn't have the data to answer a specific question, it's just going to say, I don't have the data. So those are like the types of guardrails that we create for the data professional and data scientist to be able to leverage AI without running the risk of the AI either hallucinating or going rogue.
Nice. That's a good explanation, and it does help me understand better, what Fabi is offering there, and it makes sense to constrain responses to data that are available. And I can see how that it obviously deals with a lot of the issues that I was describing around, what's the source of this information, and are these data reliable? It makes a ton of sense. Speaking of data provenance, data quality, in a tutorial that you provided online, you urge data teams to spend most of their time on the data cleaning step. But in social media posts, you've cautioned against trying to have perfect data first and then dashboards later. So you've stated that your best hires, for example, are those that lean into the mess. They explore, improvise, and ship something useful without waiting for the perfect setup. So how do you get that balance right between these, obviously on one end of spectrum, there's some kind of data cleaning that may need to happen in a lot of scenarios, but simultaneously, if you try to make everything perfect, you that the there's that saying, done is better than perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great question. Yeah, and it's always it's funny, when you write like social media posts, you're always trying to like create like these sound bites that sort of explain a concept, but it's always like the underlying concept is always like much more nuanced, much more complicated. And so I'll actually take the time to kind of like explain here how I think about this. So I think that first of all, um, I think there's kind of like a spectrum, like all sorts of nuances. So you can clean and prep the data at the like data warehouse database layer, and so you can spend a lot of your time there, or you can also do it like at completely upstream, right? And I think that there's like this whole like shift left thing where you want to do as much of data cleaning and data prep as possible at the data sort of layer, database data warehouse layer. But really, what I'm trying to say is that you don't need the perfect data model to make AI useful for you and your workflow. Like, it's great. Listen, if you have a data engineering team, or if you yourself are a data scientist who knows DBT and SQL Mesh or whatever, and you want to go and build these incredible data models and you can maintain them, and the AI has access to this fantastic wide, clean tables that are always up to date with the latest metrics, that's great. But that's hard. That's not usually how things play out in the corporate world and in the enterprise, right? Typically, like, you have some tables like that, but then you also have like a whole sort of like constellation of data that lives around it that's in spreadsheets or much more messy. And so my sort of general recommendation there is, don't try to get everything in your data warehouse and clean your data model perfectly clean before you start actually analyzing or leveraging AI. But if you are going to leverage AI to analyze some of this messier data, take the time to actually prep your data in SQL or Python before you do any sort of like further exploratory data analysis or just data science work. So let's take an example. Let's say you have this like revenue spreadsheet that was given to you by your go-to-market team or RevOps team, and you're asked to go and build some forecast or whatever on it. If you actually want to use AI to help you generate the code and like move much faster and much more efficiently, take the time, spend 90% of your time like just cleaning up that spreadsheet. Again, using whatever tool you want, whether it's literally the spreadsheet, Excel or Google Sheet or SQL or Python. Like, remove the merged cells, remove the charts, clean up the names, do all that stuff, and then the AI is going to be much more effective um, downstream in your analysis. So that's what I mean when I say like, again, I think you do need sort of good data depending on what you're trying to do with it, but you don't need perfect data, and it sort of depends on your situation and what you're working with. And if you are going to be using AI, just take the time to like frame up your data properly.
All right. Well, with that one, you've covered the topics around Fabi that I really wanted to dig into, and I want to take some time now to get into your broader experience. So, you have a decade of experience prior to co-founding Fabi as a product manager for lots of great companies: Trisata, Clari, Assembled. I'm probably mispronouncing all of those company
No,
names.
sorry.
And so, at those companies, you build platforms, APIs, self-service analytics. Drawing from that experience, when you're managing metrics, platforms like Fabi would allow product managers, like if you think about yourself in those previous roles, if you had a tool like Fabi, you would be able to very quickly spin up complex engagement metrics for your platform or your APIs on the fly. Would you be worried then about, or how would you prevent like metric sprawl, where all of a sudden you just have tons of different measures flying around. You're not really like, maybe people on the team that aren't going to be clear about what we're really building towards. Um, does that question make sense? Do you see that as a potential problem, or yeah?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the question makes perfect sense. And I do think that like there's always kind of this risk and also fear, and I think like justified fear that if you give everyone AI, then the AI is going to go and sort of like reinvent the metric every single time you ask it a question. And so we could talk about semantic layers. That's probably like one of
Oh yeah, that I hadn't even thought. That's a huge problem too. Yeah, exactly. Where
yeah.
you could have each person in the organization say, just ask their AI enhanced BI tool, how are we doing on this metric? And every time it's coming up with a new way and pulling different data. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
even bigger potential problem here.
Yeah, so that's maybe another episode for us to talk about like semantic layers and kind of that sort of ties back to like the guardrails as well that we talked about Fabi, and make sure the team's actually like supervising and collaborating and working with the business stakeholder. But to go back to your maybe original question, if that's not 100% what you had in mind, which is like, how do you make sure that? And actually, let me make sure I ask the question back. Is the question about how we um, actually, let me ask you for clarification on the question to make sure I understand, because like that's what I was thinking about when you asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely answer the question that you brought up. But what I was thinking about, you would end up with the problem that you just brought up in what I described, where if if project managers, if people across the organization, executives, product leads on individual products, if everybody can be using automated BI tools to be creating metrics on usage, you could end up having a lot of it could start to muddy the water around what the organization as a whole is building towards. Um, but even if there was agreement, so like what I think is more interesting about the question that you heard is that even if you have agreement across everyone and humans are being consistent with their definitions, and the humans all kind of have a clear idea of what they're building towards, what the metrics that they're trying to optimize are with the product that they're building, the AI could be surprising them by recalculating things a different way. So does that help kind of clarify what I was originally asking?
Yeah, I think it does. And when you ask that question, I actually have there's like two things that come to mind for me. The first is that the role of the data team, I don't think changes in the sense that like data team still needs to be there to help make sure there are consistent metrics and that we're all working towards the same North Star as a whole, as an organization, as a department or whatever. And like that's not changing, right? What you don't want is you don't want AI that like this is why we talk about dashboards. Like, I don't think dashboards are disappearing in that sense. Like, I think that dashboards are actually going to be much more powerful and useful because there's going to be fewer of them. But the ones that are actually built are going to be curated and managed by the data team because they are tracking like the actual core metrics that matter for the business. It's going to be tracking your churn, your ARR, your retention, or whatever it is. And the data team is going to be spending a lot more time making sure that those are correct. Now, when I think about AI for the business, what I think about is like all the other questions that like haven't yet made their way into your North Star metrics or your OKRs, right? So as a product manager, maybe going back to your original question, as a product manager, I still do today as a founder slash product manager, I'm constantly exploring new ways to think about the data. So, you're thinking about your user activation, for example. Maybe at some point, if you're a mature organization that's growing, like your activation is very well defined. Okay, it's seven. You have to friend seven people on Facebook, and then that's your activation metric, or that's our North Star. That's set. We're good. But a lot of organizations don't have that, or it's evolving, or you're interested in a new product, and so you don't want to go and like model what's effectively a hypothesis into your data and like pull in the data, create these new tables, and then feed that and go through the entire process and feed that through your BI solution before you've actually taken the time to figure out if that's actually what you want. And so that's where you can, thanks to AI, actually let someone like, well, ideally a pair of like a data scientist and a product manager or a data scientist and a CSM or whoever work together to kind of explore that messy phase and see like, okay, like, does this metric actually make sense? Is this how we want to think about it? And a lot of times I think what you'll find when you do that is, again, I'll draw my own experience as a product manager. You'll kind of look at the data and be like, actually, that was the wrong question I was asking. Let me rethink about what I'm really asking, and I'll get back to you. And if, as a product manager, I can start asking my own questions off the data that data science created for me or off the raw data, I'm going to get to my own answer much faster. And then we can also just sort of experiment and sit with that metric for a minute, for a month, or a quarter. And then if it's like, okay, guys, like, we're guys and gals, like, we're looking at this metric, and it's been the same metric for the last 3 months. Now maybe it's a time for us to go and like build this into add this to a dashboard. That's the point where you can like say, okay, well, how do we pipe this data into our data warehouse, and like how do we add this to our data modeling and feed it all the way through. So I think you just need to like, as carefully think about like, okay, is this a metric that like we know that we've established and that is set, and if so, then like let's go through like the quote unquote like proper channels that have the right guardrails. If not, like let's actually take the room to explore that before we go and overly invest in the measurement.
Hey, this is your host, John Krohn. I'm excited to announce that I've launched my own AI consultancy, a firm called Y Carrot. Yes, the letter Y and the deliciously crunchy veggie. At Y Carrot, we combine decades of experience in machine learning and software development with internationally recognized expertise in all the cutting-edge approaches, including Gen AI, multi-agent systems, and RAG. From problem scoping and proof of concept through to high-volume production deployments, we can do it all. To learn more, head to ycarrot.com. From there, you can click Partner with Us to tell us exactly how we can help. Again, that's ycarrot, YCARROT.com. Cool, that's very helpful. Something that follows from your response there is I'm reminded of Goodhart's law here. So Goodhart's law is that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And so, like you just described a great process there for identifying a great measure. But then, yeah, Goodhart's law is that once that becomes a target, it starts to become a poor measure because people start gaming it. And so, yeah, do you have any magic solutions for that?
Yeah, I wish I did. I don't have any magic solutions, but I certainly have a thought about it, which is, first of all, incentives. I don't know. I don't know how much of your audience has worked, and Clary is like a RevOps platform, and so I worked in like the sales and marketing world for decades. So I don't know how much of your audience like has lived in that world. There's certainly some folks who are listening who have probably like done some quota setting and that kind of stuff. That stuff is at its hard. Like if you think it's easy to go and like set a quota and like how you incentivize your sales teams and your marketing team, let me tell you, that is a tough job, because the minute you set a quota with a certain incentive, like these are smart people who are going to go and like, I'm not saying they're dishonest. Like I don't think anyone's necessarily dishonest in this situation, but like it's your livelihood, right? And we're talking like big dollars here. And like people are going to find ways to go and like get creative. I don't have a good answer on that one, but I will say that like one thing that I've experienced, especially I think if you're working at like a large public company where you're kind of at like cruising altitude in terms of business, like maybe it's not like this crazy growth business and the metrics are generally the same and all that kind of stuff, and like your measures and dimensions, all that kind of stuff probably aren't changing that much. But the reality is, a lot of us work, especially here in Valley, and you're in New York. In New York, like, you're working in startups that like are constantly growing and shifting, getting creative, adding new products. Like the actual OKRs and the measures are always changing. Like they're always. It's so hard to like even ARR, man. It's like one of those things where you think you have it nailed, and the next thing you know, the product team goes and adds a credit based system for consumption based pricing, and next thing you know, it's like ARR means a completely different thing next quarter, and what felt like a sure value isn't at all. So all I can say is that I think if you try to set metrics in stone and you're sort of hell-bent on that, like you're just going to set yourself up for a heartache. And I think you have to like just be willing and flexible as things go to some degree, right? And I think obviously you need to push back when it doesn't make sense to rethink a measure.
I like that answer a lot. And it is something that I've experienced a lot in companies that I've been in where you can kind of, in a lot of scenarios, you're like, okay, quarter to quarter, we can do a good comparison. But if we want to kind of look back to how we were doing
Yeah.
a year ago on this metric, it's like, man, that was a completely different time for our platform. And so, like you're saying, like even something that seems so clear cut as ARR
Annual
just
recurring revenue,
doesn't.
by the way, for y'all. I don't know if that's a obvious, yeah, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That is a bit of an inside baseball term if you think about it.
Yeah, but yeah, no, you think that stuff would be stable, but it's not. And again, it's like you introduce a new product or the business shifted and priorities shifted, and even by the way, we talk about storytelling. It's like the way the executives want to tell the story to the board changes. Now suddenly you want to emphasize a different sort of revenue source to tell a growth story. Like even just that small subtle shift can turn things on its head.
Pivot. Um, so going back right to the beginning of the episode, so we've wrapped up all the technical questions that I had for you in any way related to tech or AI. But right at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about how you did this master's in neurotechnology at Imperial College London. I'd love to just know, like, a brief overview of what you were doing in neurotech research back then.
Yeah, so it was a broader biotech master's, and what we were studying a lot of was the signal process. It was a lot of signal processing from brain waves for things like controlling robotic arms. So one thing that you're probably honestly like much better suited to actually talk about this than I am at this stage. But you have like these chip implants that would be implanted like monkeys, and the idea was like you'd control a mechanical arm to eventually help people who have disabilities, and so you'd be studying the brain waves, right? And that's incredibly complex because you're dealing with like literally billions of connections, and the signal's anything but clear. And so that's a lot of signal processing where you're sort of trying to separate the signal from the noise. So like even if you, for example, have someone that's kind of like has their eyes open and you're asking to control an arm, it's like, is that signal, is their brain reacting to what they're seeing at the time, or is their brain reacting to them trying to control the arm? So there's a lot of that. And actually, but I actually specialized in something a little bit different, which was image processing. So I did my research on using image processing to try to detect early onset Alzheimer's by looking at brain scans. So one of the earliest signs you can get from or physiological signs, I should say, because like there are some other like markers that you can look at now that I think it's much more advanced than it was even back 10 years ago. But back then, one of the early signs you could look at was the brain shrinking, and the brain shrinking size was way too subtle for a doctor to catch early on. So you'd catch it eventually over multiple months, but by that time it was too late. It's hard to say because it's hard to reverse Alzheimer's, but you can maybe like even slow it down. And so the idea was to use image processing to like try to detect like the slightest nuance shrinkage in brain size at the very or in the very early days.
Nice. And so then maybe you can have interventions, medication starting sooner for people
Yeah.
in those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, I love that stuff. It's so hard. But yeah, if you can do that early. I've also very passionate about Alzheimer's. Had a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but I've had family members impacted, and so that was very interesting research for me. And I think there's been like so much progress even since then. That was 10 years ago, and I see kind of amazing things coming out. So huge kudos to anyone working on that area. I think it's a fantastic research area.
Yeah, and hopefully AI can play a role in accelerating this. And just kind of generally as a society, the more and more and more that we can automate having nutrition for people on the planet, having a roof
Absolutely.
to cover our heads, having security. That's more and more and more people that can be doing research and coming up with solutions, working with AI to have solutions faster.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of anyone working on like hard tech. I mean, there's some hard problems out there to be solved around medicine, agriculture. And so, again, kudos to anyone working on that. I'm also very founder friendly. So if anyone's listening to this and you're a founder working on that space, I'm more than happy to connect and see what I can do to help you on your journey.
Nice. Well, so my final question is how people should connect with you, but we'll just skip right to that, and I'll ask you for your book recommendation after. So, how should people reach out to you or follow you after today's episode, Mark?
Yep. So I am on Twitter. So definitely follow me there. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn. So you can add links to the show notes, but I'll share those with you.
Nice. Thanks, Mark. And then, your book recommendation for us?
Yeah, so I'm a big Walter Isaacson fan. He writes these incredible biographies, which Steve Jobs probably being like one of the more famous ones. I'm sure a lot of folks have read, but big fan of the Einstein one. So the Einstein one is a fascinating read. He was an incredible character, and really makes you think about like what the source of creativity is, but also the book's almost spiritual to me because it really makes you realize like how little we actually know about the universe that we live in and how much more there is to be discovered. So very fun read, very interesting. Highly recommend it.
That sounds great. I've added it to my personal list.
There you go.
Nice. Thanks a lot, Mark. This has been a fun and informative episode. Hopefully, we'll be welcoming you back again in the future to hear more on how the fabi.ai journey is coming along.
Absolutely, John. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure, and yeah, hopefully we'll get to connect again in the future.
An inspiring episode from a founder cleverly streamlining workflows with AI. In today's episode, Marc Dupuis covered how fabi.ai emerged from the frustration of product managers constantly asking data scientists for quote unquote quick data pulls. He talked about why AI tools elevate data scientists rather than replacing them by eliminating routine coding tasks and allowing focus on business understanding, experimentation design, and statistical supervision of AI outputs. He talked about why AI workflows that push insights directly into tools like Slack or email, where people actually work, deliver far better ROI than traditional dashboards. And he talked about how building AI-first products requires designing for variable autonomy levels and making every action fully reversible to handle the inevitable wrong turns in AI-assisted work. As always, you can get all those show notes, including the transcript for this episode, the video recording, any materials that were mentioned on the show, the URLs for Mark's social media profiles and my own at superdatascience.com/937. Thanks to the Super Data Science podcast team, our podcast manager, Sonia Brejovic, media editor, Mario Pombo, partnerships manager, Natalie Jaisky, researcher, Serge Massis, our writer, Dr. Zara Karshe, and our founder, Kirill Eremenko. Thanks to all of them for producing another stellar episode for us today, for enabling that stellar team to create this free podcast for you. We are deeply grateful to our sponsors. You can support this show by checking out our sponsors' links in the show notes. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show yourself, you can find out how to do that at johnkrohn.com/podcast. Otherwise, please do help us out any other way you can. Share the podcast with folks who'd love to hear this episode. Review the show wherever you consume podcast content. Subscribe, and most importantly, just keep on tuning in. I'm so grateful to have you listening, and I hope I can continue to make episodes you love for years and years to come. Until next time, keep on rocking it out there, and I'm looking forward to enjoying another round of the Super Data Science Podcast with you very soon.